The following graph gives information about commuting time in different regions in Britain, 2014. The items include London, Yorkshire, South East, North West, and South West. According to this graph, in London, the value of the commuting time is around 107 minutes, which is the highest value. You can see from this graph that the second highest value of the commuting time is in East of England, which is 71. The lowest value of commuting time is in South West, which is around 56. In conclusion, London has the highest value of commuting time. The following graph gives information about how a tomato seed can become a tomato plant. It shows how the process is done. The steps include tomato seed, a young plant, a mature plant, a flower, and a fruit. According to this graph, the first step is tomato seed, which is in a tomato fruit cut in half. According to this graph, the second step is to become a young tomato plant, which is green. You can see from this graph that the third step, a mature tomato plant with green leaves rooted in brown soil, followed by a flower as the fourth step. The final step is a red fruit that comes out of the flower, and the cycle will start over. In conclusion, this graph is very informative. The following graph gives information about stuff in the rubbish bin. This is a very beautiful picture, and it shows a number of things. According to this graph, in the left area, there is a lot of acceptable food scrap including eggshell, fish bone, soiled paper, noodle, plate scraping, vegetable and orange, surrounding a rubbish bin. The color of the bin is gray. You can see from this graph that, in the right area, there is a lot of unacceptable items including disposable lunchbox, diaper, animal waste, plastic container, flower pot. The color of the lunchbox is white. And the color of the flower pot is brownish red. You can see from this graph that, at the background, there is comparison between acceptable and unacceptable items in the rubbish bin. In conclusion, this picture is very informative. The following graph gives information about media in UK. The items include internet, TV, newspaper and radio. According to this graph, in internet, the value of 2005 is around 60%, and that of 2003 is lower, which is around 50%. You can see from this graph that the highest value of 2001 is in radio, which is 63%. In conclusion, newspaper has the lowest value in 2005, about 3%. This picture gives information about correct and incorrect postures. It is a very interesting picture, because it shows a number of things. According to the picture, at the left area, there is a man sitting on the chair. He sits very straight and his eyes are looking at the computer screen, and his hands placed naturally on the keyboard. According to the picture, at the right area, the man is sitting on the chair and his back is hunched bent over, and his hands placed too close to the table. In conclusion, this picture is very informative because it gives information about correct and incorrect postures. The following line chart gives information about palm oil production of Indonesia and Malaysia. According to the line chart, we can see the red line of Indonesia rises from the lowest point, about 5 million tons in 1997 and 1998, to the highest point, about 18 million tons in 2007 and 2008. We can also see the blue line of Malaysia rises from the lowest point, about 8.5 million tons in 1997 and 1998, to the highest point, about 16 million tons in 2007 and 2008. And Malaysia is always higher than Indonesia until 2005 or 2006. After that, Indonesia is higher than Malaysia. In conclusion, this chart is very informative. The following graph gives information about the graduation laboratory. Data of different areas are displayed on the map. At the central area, there are storage and toilets. At the left area, there are animal sciences. According to this graph, the largest area is plant sciences. In comparison, the smallest area is office. In conclusion, there are computer station and meeting room shown on the map. The following graph gives information about the annual change in forest area by region. Data of different areas are displayed on the map. The items include net gain, states, and net loss. According to this graph, the largest areas of forest gain in the 1990-2000 year are in Asia. In comparison, the smallest areas of the net gain in 1990-2000 are in Africa. You can see from this graph that the largest areas of net loss in 1990-2000 are in Africa. In conclusion, the area of the net gain in Asia is much larger than that of the net loss. The following graph gives information about the closed-loop recycling process. It shows how the process is done. The steps include collect and recycle, sort and shred, mold and manufacture, and so on. According to this graph, the first step is to collect and recycle. Then, sort and shred is the second step. You can see from this graph that the mold and manufacture follows. After that, it is to assemble and ship. Finally, it comes to purchase and use. To sum up, this graph tells about recycling process. The following graph gives information about adding an article to Wikipedia. It shows how the process is done. The steps include searching Wikipedia, thinking of another term, creating a new article. According to this graph, the first step is searching for Wikipedia. According to this graph, in the second stage, there are two questions. The first question is it found? And if the answer is yes, it goes to think of another term. If the answer is no, it goes to the second question, is there a related term? And if the answer is yes, it goes to create a redirect. If it is no, it goes to create a new article. In conclusion, this graph is very informative. The following graph gives information about teaching as a career. The items include final year student who wants to be a teacher, graduate students working in teaching, employed in the teaching field. According to this graph, the value of final year students who want to be a teacher is around 1%. And the value of graduate students working in teaching is around 7%, which is higher. You can see from this graph that the highest value is in employed in the teaching field, which is around 95%. You can also see from this graph that the lowest value is in final year students who want to be a teacher, which is around 1%. In conclusion, employed in the teaching field has the highest teaching as a career. The following graph gives information about world population development from 1750 to 2050 in developing and industrialized countries. From the graph we can see that the population in developing countries has remained stable in 1 billion from 1750 to 1900. After that it witnessed a dramatic increase to 10 billion until 2050. However, for industrialized countries, it remained at a relatively low level throughout the years, which is around 1 billion. In conclusion, while developing countries have undergone a sharp population increase, the population in industrialized countries has seen little change. The following graph gives information about Australian population density. Data of different areas are displayed on the map. According to this graph, Melbourne and Sydney are the most populated city in Australia. In comparison, the smallest population is in the middle of Australia. You can see from this graph that Queensland will become the third largest populated city in Australia. In conclusion, this graph is very informative. The following graph gives information about Bank of America bets on the consumer. The items include top U.S. banks ranked by assets and Bank of America revenue by segment. According to this graph, the highest value of U.S. banks ranked by assets is around 1.2000 T, which is in Citigroup. On the contrary, the lowest value of U.S. banks ranked by assets is around 120 B, which is in HSBC. You can see from this graph that the largest proportion of the Bank of America is around 56, which is in consumer and small business. You can also see from this graph that the smallest proportion of the Bank of America is around 8, which is in wealth management. In conclusion, this graph is very informative. The line chart shows the projected population in Australia in millions. According to the chart, the Series A has increased dramatically from 20 in 2001 to 65 in 2101. Following that, Series B has increased moderately from 20 to 45, from 2001 to 2101. However, Series C has increased slowly from 20 to 35 over the same period. In conclusion, the projected population in Australia is expected to increase in the coming years. The following graph gives information about the average household energy consumption. The items include other appliances, water heating, cooking and so on. According to this graph, the proportion of other appliances is around 24%, and that of water heating is lower, which is around 23%. You can see from this graph that the highest proportion is other appliances, which is around 24%. You can also see from this graph that the lowest proportion is cooking and standby, which is around 5%. In conclusion, other appliances have the highest proportion of average household energy consumption. The following graph gives information about students' hours spent at the university. The items include sleeping, leisure, and sports, grooming and so on. According to this graph, the value of sleeping is around 8.3 hours, and that of leisure and sports is lower, which is around 3.9 hours. You can see from this graph that the highest value is sleeping, which is around 8.3 hours. You can also see from this graph that the lowest value is grooming, which is around 0.8 hours. In conclusion, sleeping has the highest number of students' hours spent at university. This picture shows the pyramid of food. At the bottom of the pyramid, we can see water, which is the most essential to human bodies. Above water, on the second layer of the pyramid, we can see fruits, bread, and cereals. Above the fruits, bread, and cereals, there is a milk, cheese, and meat level. Above the milk products and meat, we can see junk food, which at the top of the pyramid. In conclusion, this graph is very informative. The following graph gives information about temperature of Beijing, China. The items include daily high and daily low throughout the year. You can see from this graph that, in daily high, the value of January is around 1 degree centigrade. You can see from this graph that, in daily high, the value of July is around 30 degrees centigrade, which is the highest. You can see from this graph that, in daily low, the value of July is around 22 degrees centigrade, which is lower. You can see from this graph that, in daily low, the value of December is around -10 degrees centigrade, which is the lowest. In conclusion, this graph is very informative. This graph gives information about monthly temperature and precipitation. If you look at precipitation, which is in the blue bar, the largest number can be found in April, reaching about 300. The smallest number can be found in July, which is almost 10. If you look at the temperature, which is in black line, the largest number can be found in March, reaching about 23. The smallest number can be found in July, which is almost 20. In conclusion, mid-year is the coolest and driest period.